Very good. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hugues Lavandier. I'm a senior partner with McKinsey. I lead our industry and technology sector in France. Industry and technology means upstream industrials, downstream industrials, and technology. Very happy to see you all here today. This is the first of two panels we're going to have this afternoon. And the theme of this one is on what we call green tech scaling 2.0, and frankly, what are the unlocks to accelerate? I'm going to set the stage relatively quickly, and then we should get into the conversation. But if you go back to the net zero transition report that we as McKinsey published now probably a little over a year ago, there are a few things in there which are particularly meaningful in the context of this conversation. The first one is when you look at what it's going to take to maintain a 1.5 degree net zero trajectory, it's going to take $9.2 trillion of investment per year in the next 30 years, of which 3.5 trillion per year are incremental to the current baseline. And that's investment in capital spending on physical assets for energy and land use assets. That's 8.8% of the global GDP starting in 2026. So it's a massive amount. In many ways, it's going to be the biggest capital reallocation of the history of capitalism, essentially ever. And when you further look at the analysis we have done, our estimate is that roughly 70% of the technologies that will be used for that technology transition exist today in any way or form, right? And they need to be scaled up, which was one of the points that Karl-Erik made a little earlier, saying, hey, we actually, at Vargas, different people will have different investment thesis on that, but we at Vargas actually invest into scaling technologies. And so this discussion today in this panel is really about that, right? And so what we want to do here is go into the nuts and bolts of this absurd ambition that Thomas was talking about, especially what are the key drivers for scaling? What does it take? The disruptive approach to different industries and what that means. And also, how do we set as business leaders ambition goals while embarking all the stakeholders? So with us today, a few people with the names on the screen, but I'm gonna do a very quick introduction. Starting at the very end, our friend Clément Ray. Clément is one of the co-founders and the CEO of Innovafeed. Innovafeed is one of the global leaders of proteins for animal feed. I think you have raised 120 million euro in 2020, again 250 probably last year. And so we are excited to have you here today. Then we have sitting next to you Philippe Rosier. Philippe, you are the CEO of Symbio. Symbio, if anybody doesn't know, is the joint venture between Forvia and Michelin, and dedicated to the industrialization of industrial systems, hydrogen systems, sorry. Then sitting next to me, Julia Reinaud from Breakthough Energy. So many of you may know Breakthough Energy as being a massive venture capital fund organized, coordinated by Bill Gates with a number of other people like Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson or Mark Benioff. Breakthough Energy also does a lot of work from a policy standpoint. You are also supporting a lot of research. And Julia is the senior director in Europe of Breakthough Energy. And then finally on the screen, because he couldn't come for the day as planned from Grenoble, Benoît Lemaignan, co-founder and CEO of Vekor. Many of you probably know Vekor is one of the leading European player in lithium-ion batteries, and you have raised way north of 250 million euro at this point, most likely. Thank you for being here. So let me start. And what I propose we do is we're going to go through a few questions here and discuss, and then at some point we'll open up on for Q&As on with the room. When maybe first with a little bit of semantic. Quite often, people talk of industry shapers when they talk about startups, right? The term of shaper, as opposed to leading or managing, comes in again and again and again. And I'd love to explore that a little bit also from a managerial standpoint, what it means as a leader in the industry to shape an industry. And I know maybe, Clément, if I can start with you, and if you have any reflection on that from your viewpoint as a CEO and founder.
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe let's start by what it takes to build an industry from the start. First, you need to develop a new technology. Then you need to scale it at various industrial stages, from lab scale to pilot scale, until target industrial scale. At the same time, you need to scale your human organization in order to meet the needs of each stage of this journey. You need to build the business model. You need to organize the go-to-market of your products. And you need to frame the regulatory framework for this industry. And last but not least, you need to gather the funding in order to make it happen. The last one being most likely easier if you have done well on the first items. And coming back to your question, Yves, what is the responsibility of the founder, leader, shaper in this journey? I would say it's threefold. First, you need to be, at some point, you need to set the vision for the project, where you want to go. And it will be, for the ecosystem and your team, a North Star in this journey. Very clearly, your roadmap will evolve along the way in order to incorporate all the learnings that you will get in this journey. But having a stable point where you, even if the journey, if the roadmap is evolving, to set very clearly where you want to go is extremely important to stabilize your organization and your ecosystem. That's one. I think two, the responsibility is about making things happen. And let me explain. I think at some point you need to break a circle where you need to get fundings to develop your product. You need product to get contracts, and you need contracts to get fundings. So that's a circle that you need to break at some point. And that's also your responsibility as a shaper of a new industry. And in my own experience, I have experienced that the part of the circle where you can make a breakthrough is by developing partnership and long-term contracts with your customer, and not as you can think with getting the fundings when you don't have already the contracts or your product which is fully developed. And three, I think the last part of the responsibility is to set the standard for your industry. You have a lot of freedom at the beginning. You are playing in a green field. And you need to make the right decision to make your model as circular as you can, to develop the business model that limits to the maximum your footprint, because what you are building will be the standard for the growth and the development of your industry going forward.
Thank you, Clément. Julia, from your viewpoint, more from a, I would say, policy standpoint, how do you think, what does it mean to shape an industry?
Is this working? Okay. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. As I explained a little bit, our role in shaping the industry, and I'd call it at large, because Breakthough Energy is operating across what we call our 5 grand challenges. So from agriculture, buildings, manufacturing, power, and all other sectors that emit greenhouse gas emissions. We're very much focused on what we call, of course, what we talked about, the green premium, how to bring down the costs, and that involves looking at which stage of development is a technology with an impact, and then thinking about how you can help scale it. So from the perspective of Breakthough Energy, we support and we get involved in technologies and companies and in projects that I can speak about when it has an impact, and we quantify that impact of 0.5 gigaton of CO2 at scale. So first and foremost, we try to shape with an impact, and so that's where we operate, across the innovation cycle and thinking about different interventions that will be filling a gap in terms of what is needed to help let that company or that technology grow from one stage to another. We essentially are a network of venture funds, investment vehicles, but also not-for-profit, and that's I'll come to my role and the role of our policy and philanthropic work in a second. If you sort of take the earliest stages, we have a program called Fellows, where we provide grants to researchers, which we call our fellows, innovator fellows, and we match them with business mentors to help them think through what is their commercialization strategy, how do they access the market, building on the models of Activate, of Cyclotron Road, thinking that it's not because your technology works that you shouldn't be already thinking about your clients, to Clément's point. The second program that we have, so that's a fellows program where we've got 65 fellows across 11 countries, and we're growing even further. The second, which is now an investment vehicle, is Breakthough Energy Ventures. So you mentioned that indeed it's raised 2 funds, and it's raising its 3rd fund, over $2 billion of committed capital in about 100 plus portfolio companies. And here again, we're operating, providing equity at the earliest stages, but then thinking through what is the needed type of capital and what is the needed type of support. And here this is patient capital, aligned with the tech development cycles that you have for these hardware and tech-focused, CapEx-heavy industries. The third program that we have and associated to Breakthough Energy Ventures is the Select Fund, which we've announced, where Temasek is an anchor partner with Breakthrough. The third program that we have addresses what we call the third sort of valley of death, which is that when you have a first commercial scale project, but you're still missing the type of project finance that is enabled, that is sort of has a risk appetite. And so here we've raised $1 billion of fund in the form of grants, but also in the form of low-cost equity, again, tailored to the needs of large-scale projects like long-duration energy storage, hydrogen, green steel, and others. So all of this is more in terms of what is our financial commitment, how have we organized ourselves, again, to fill the funding gap. But I think something that has been mentioned as well is we're also working with this more with a philanthropic ambition in mind, which is how do you shape the right type of policies? We heard about the IRA. We haven't spoken so much about the EU's response to the IRA, thinking about how do you make sure that you align the right type of regulations with the next generation of technologies? How do you make sure that any type of grant mechanism is supportive of the next generation of technologies? And so this is the type of work that we do to be funding philanthropically initiatives like the European Green Hydrogen Acceleration Center, which I can speak more to. So we define ourselves looking, again, first and foremost at the impact, and then flexible enough, if you will, to tailor to the needs of that innovation and to the companies throughout their journey.
That's great. Thank you, Julia. If I go back to what Karl-Erik was talking about a little earlier, there is an expression I noted down that I thought was wonderfully said. I think it was written on the page, in fact, thinking big, acting fast, and getting things done. And so the theme of execution, the theme of agility, right? I guess all the consultants in the world talk about it, including us. Maybe directing the question to you first, Benoît, but not exclusively to you, obviously. How do you manage this? How do you manage speed and execution? How do you manage agility in the organization? What feels different about it?
Thank you, hello, everyone. And indeed, the little bit of challenges of trains prevented me from being with you, but I'm happy to attend remote and hope to can share views later down the road in similar events. I used to say to the team at Vekor that somehow we had a plan starting 2.5 years ago that was clear, and we are on the plan. The difficult part of it is to match the vision, the execution, and the reality. And I think certainly Clément can share some of similar feedbacks. Is that for me, agility is being capable of raising the bar in terms of management skills, leadership skills, decision-making processes at a time where the company is still mostly people-driven, because the founding team and the early comers have this mindset of being able to somehow sort out whatever happens. And then as you go into the stage of development, you clearly need to process it. You need to organize a company. And for some of the early comers, it's let's put it like, they don't like it, because they say, okay, yeah, but we were a startup and now we are becoming a processed industrial company like any other. And I say usually no, not exactly, because we are willing to scale up fast, to have a large impact, to facilitate and accelerate energy transition towards low carbon mobility solutions. This is clearly the engagement of Vekor. I think we share a lot with what Karl-Erik probably shared with you also, in the sense of what Northvolt has been pushing. It's no need to jump in a new technology, no need to be disruptive, need to execute fast, large, at scale now, to simply kick oil out of our economy. This is what we are about. And so this is the vision, and this is there is the execution. Another thing that is not easy is to onboard senior managers, men and women with a long experience, that are keen to bring what needs to be brought to the company, but at the same time, keeping the stamina, the engagement of the people. And I should not clearly underemphasize the need to be super careful about that, to this permanent alignment between bringing what you need to become an industrial company in terms of quality, safety, process-oriented, budget control, and so on and so forth, but still keep the engagement that you have at the beginning. And I think this is not something new. I mean, I've spoken to so many startups in the same field, but to really sum up is how, and I can give an answer to how we do that, how to keep the alignment between the vision and the execution. And you should not have one, that is completely not attached anymore to the other one. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. So how do we do that? First of all, I've put a lot of emphasis into people growth, talent growth, but also trying to empower the people, have them accountable and responsible. Easier said than done, for sure. But really trying to have a subsidiary approach of, if one decision is relevant for you, if this is not going to kill the company, let's take the decision. And then we sort out what can happen. Because if we begin at the day one to put in place all that will be needed when we're going to be 10,000 later down the road, we're not going to make it. I think the other dimension is to, and let me quote Peter Carlson here, to eat the elephant, piece by piece. If you want right away to be starting a gigafactory, you are nowhere, because people will feel completely out of control. So that's why also we started a lab that is up and running. We started our Vek in Grenoble, just where I'm sitting, that is now starting, literally. And then step by step, we train, we fail sometime, we learn, and then we start again. And we learn as an organization. What is important each time is what is the lesson we have taken from this experience as an organization, to facilitate when things are tough. Because let's be clear, what we do is no easy journey. It's not easy to start such a company and to have that speed of growth, but it's also extremely exciting and super rewarding when you see things come together, and that at the end of the day, after less than 1.5 years, 18 months, we delivered to Renault, our big customer, a cell at the spec out of our lab, starting from literally a piece of PowerPoint 2 years ago. It's super rewarding. It's a once life experience. So I think it's always combining that is exciting. And I think this is similar to every similar project. Vision is clear, execution is key. Make sure we have touch point between them as much as possible, and also make sure to empower people while onboarding senior managers, senior leaders that can bring the experience. This is no easy, but a really exciting journey in which we are.
Thank you, Benoît. Maybe Philippe, turning to you, because if you allow me, I mean, you lead a bit of a strange animal, right? Both a startup, but co-founded by like two French behemoths from an industrial standpoint. How do you think about speed, agility, execution at Symbio?
Okay, so Symbio, it's we started as a startup 12 years ago on the fuel cell system. So the mobility hydrogen system. We were 3 years ago 50 people. We are today about 700. Our ambition is to build 4 gigafactories. The first one will start up at the end of the year in Saint-Fond, next to Lyon. So we all agree that industrialization is really the key levers. When you look at what it means financing. We have strong shareholders. There are subsidies that we can raise debt financing. I will say it's easy. Getting access to human resource, to my big surprise, I must say, it's easy. We doubled the size last year, so we hired about 350 talents last year. We had 7,000 candidates for those positions. We created Symbio Academy to train those people because we don't have the hydrogen talents we need. So, but young people like to go in this type of business. They like hydrogen, automobile experts, or even chemical experts like to do. So I will say that we manage. Skills, you say also, we have it within our companies, industrial skills, technical innovation, and so on. So to come back to your question, the key difficulty, and that's where as a leadership team we spend the most efforts, is to create this special culture for this scale-up period we are, from the startup to the tier one. We pretend to be one day as at Symbio. And let me explain what I mean. Startups are great. They are agile, they are entrepreneurial, but they don't have the skills of industrialization. They don't have the discipline. They don't have the customer focus. So it's very difficult for a startup to keep this culture and industrialize. On the contrary, for a large conglomerates like my shareholders, it's extremely difficult to, of course, they have the skills, but it's extremely difficult to keep the agility needed in these markets. I mean, see the regulation only in Europe. You know, it's changing every week. Our product mix is changing every month. So it's key in this stage to have this dual capacities of the startup and also of an industrial company. So we designed that. We spend a lot of time. We have designed a project we call One Symbio to co-build this special culture with our employees. It's clearly a culture to go much more to collective efforts, much more empowerment. It was said by Benoît before, and this is the state where, before going to real corporate style culture, you know, of efficiency and so on, that is key for this phase of the company.
So you are hitting a very important point, which is a place where I'd love to go, which is how do you balance experience and disruption, right? And maybe turning back to you, Clément, there is a constant debate, I guess, in the industry, especially in countries like France, where there is a very strong industrial base, about you need a lot of experience, you need a lot of like engineering skills, you need to know how to build a plant, and so on and so forth. At the same time, you need to have a very disruptive and different approach in the way you do that, and sometimes you need to start from scratch. How have you approached that at Innovafeed, if I may direct that to you?
poorly. No, kidding. I think that's exactly what Benoît explained a little bit earlier. In my perspective, you need to anticipate the fact that the culture and the skills of your company will need to evolve in order to succeed in the next phase of your project. The first few years are clearly about building the ecosystem, the technology, building the business model, and do it as fast as you can in order to take a competitive advantage, to build a strong momentum and create a strong track record. And then, at some point, you need to transition to a phase where you have to execute perfectly, meeting all your deadlines, all your budget, in order to deliver your promise. And you don't need the same people. You don't need the same culture for the previous phase and your new phase. And I won't be long on this point, but my advice will be: you need to be aware of this transition and anticipate it. The sooner you start working on it, the better. And the second piece of advice will be that you need to hire the right people with a very strong level of expertise, that are still understanding the culture of your company, the vision, what you want to do, and try to build the alchemy between the previous, the historical people having built the company so far, and the newcomer. And I think completely shifting the culture to a pure, let's say, standard industrial culture, I think would be also another pitfall that you need to balance. That's really trade-offs. Building, for instance, your executive committee with half of the people that will bring new experience and half of the people that will be that will have all the knowledge of the track record and story of the company.
Julia, I see you nodding very actively, listening to Clément about this balance between experience and innovation. What's your view from the standpoint of Breakthough?
I think one other dimension I think that's very necessary to the whole transition, and particularly through the experience that the three of you have shared, is this need to sort of constantly educate the policymakers who are defining the rules of the game. And so if you think back at Northvolt, part of that story came from the European Battery Alliance that was driven by Energy that's very close to Vekor and to H2 Green Steel, but equally by the European Commission and the EIB sort of taking a first risk, but also helping define the market. If you think of the business that Thierry is in terms of, for example, hydrogen, it took close to 2 years to define what is low carbon hydrogen and how do you define that. I think the industry can't wait to have those types of sort of weightings of definitions and political battles. I think one of the efforts that we've been very much focused on is to help build the bridges between the investors in new tech, in sort of next generation of technologies, and the policymakers. And within that, we've sort of taken two approaches. One is really to take the perspective of the venture funds, the growth funds, so that they can explain to policymakers what do they have in their portfolio, showing that there is a skin in the game, there is an investment here, but equally sort of what are the new solutions that are being provided. The second is, out of this group, Clean Tech for Europe, we've also set up something called the Scale Up Coalition. So companies like Vekor, H2 Green Steel, Volvo Trucks are in there. All companies that have raised, 50 million, more than that, and all struggling in a way, if you will, to attract the right type of de-risking, the right type of financing, the right type of offtake, and again, building bridges with the policymakers, with institutions like the EIB, KfW, and others, for them to help, if you will, tailor, much like we had with renewables, 20 years ago, where you had sort of that contract for difference, you had that de-risking mechanism. How do we make sure that we develop that for these nascent industries that are going to be game-changing because they provide a lot of value and scarce resources in the fact that they are decarbonized, but yet not able to scale because they're in a position where they don't yet have industrial partnerships. So I think that's one of the elements that I did want to come back to on the policy and regulation. The second effort I wanted to share was more around how do we build up that off-taker coalitions. And we've been working with the First Movers Coalition, which is 70 plus sort of large companies in their Volvo trucks, Holcim, Trafigura, and others, who are sort of pledging to make a commitment to buy 10% of their supply from low carbon and breakthroughs in steel, in aluminium, in cement. And sort of thinking then, working with those companies to help define, okay, what is a benchmark? And then help expose and to give to them some of the opportunities to talk with these suppliers that might not be ready today, but yet would be able to have those products available on the market by 2030 or a bit later. So this is how I think it's important to sort of look at policy regulation, but equally some of the strategic partnerships that we can help build along the routes. Because again, if you don't have the offtake or some commitment of offtake, then it'll be very difficult to find the finance unless you have risk takers like us, but also like others, like Vergas, who we've heard about earlier.
Just maybe before opening up to questions in the audience, when you were talking about off-takers and off-takes, I saw Benoît's face get animated. I know it's a topic which is close to your heart, so I don't know if you have any comment.
Yeah, I wanted to bring maybe another dimension to this audience and panel, which is people first, because we know what's ahead in terms of hiring plan, not only of us, but also, I mean, you've seen the huge figures from Northvolt. We know that Symbio is recruiting a lot. We know that Innovafeed and your competitors will also need lots of people. It's about changing the views of the young generation towards the industry. And I'm making a strong point here because, you know, we've been through COVID. So literally the young graduates of today have been living in their apartments, watching Netflix series for a while without not, needing to wake up early enough to be at the office. And this is for us a big topic because we have internal conversation at Vekor where people come in and say, I'm happy to join. It's fantastic, saving the climate. I want to be part of that, fancy startup that is Vekor today. Is it possible to work remote 4 days a week? And we go like, you guys, we are an industry. We are changing the world by changing the material, compiling lithium, cobalt, nickel into battery, and that deserves to be spending time in front of a machine and, supporting supervisors and operators. And to be completely blunt, we sometimes have crazy discussions because I can only regret that part of, I would say, for the French ecosystem, it's clear in engineering schools typically is a little bit far away from that reality. And it's something that for us is important. That's why we structured the battery school, École de la Batterie, that is an initiative from the ecosystem all together to really train the people from the very beginning to the end, meaning from operators to supervisors until managers, line managers and executives, to this reality, because this is good news. I mean, that transition will bring a lot of jobs to Europe. Now we have to make them appealing. We have to make, enough a fraction of the new graduates willing to join those industries and not willing to go into finance and or to you guys, McKinsey, which is good for you, but difficult for us because we need to somehow try to attract the same type of talents. I wanted to make this point here because in terms of scale up, this is extremely important. And sure, France and Europe and Germany are large industrial countries, even if France is probably for now a little less than Germany, but this should not be underestimated. It's also about making people, and this is why I'm here. It is why I think we spend all of us time to share that with engineering schools and others, is to really make sure that we will have the right talent pools later down the road to reinforce the teams and take over the leadership positions that we will have. And I wanted to share that with you because I think it's as important as being finance, having customers. Demand is here for sure. Having technologies, we are optimizing technologies, not creating disruption. So, I wanted to share that with you on top of what was shared.
This is for sure super important. Thank you, Benoît. I think we have been told we have time to take a couple of questions from the room. So if anybody has questions, either for all of our panelists or one in particular, please stand up.
Yes, hello. I'd just like to know, what do you think is the role of the governments in this transition? How do you work with them? And more specifically, how do you work with the national governments in Europe and the EU on these topics?
Well, first point, setting regulations, which is a long way still. Regulation for us on automotive, regulation decarbonized hydrogen. There are a lot of uncertainties today that is in front of us. Second is accelerating the access to trained resource. New training in hydrogen, in new mobilities. And third, but I must say it was largely done in our sector in Europe, is access to subsidies. We won a large IPCEI program from France, and even if it's not as, let's say, fast and simple as in the US, I must say it's quite ambitious and quite new for Europe. So it's good to see that Europe is supporting deployment, but also supporting industrialization.
Julia?
I can build on what Philippe was saying. I'd also add providing the right infrastructure. I think in the type of transition that we're in, be that the infrastructure related to the grid, being able to access that electricity. We've been working with a company called Gravity that's providing hydrogen-based billets and the pellets, and the amount of electricity that they need is it's equivalent to a few nuclear reactors. So being able to access that infrastructure, and I'm also hearing around the need for CO2 infrastructure, hydrogen infrastructure when that will be ready. I think in terms of financing, to add again what Philippe was saying, I think fund-of-fund programs, I think it's really important to mobilize other funders, and thinking of programs that the BPI is running, but also the EIF. I think it's important to consider that. And then also to introduce another dimension, that of procurement. Perhaps it's not relevant for all industries, but certainly green public procurement for infrastructure and thinking about how they can use embodied carbon in the materials. That's also a very important sort of dimension at the national level as well as at the international level. And we've been supporting an initiative called IDDI that's trying to actually coordinate among procurers of cement and steel and construction products around the world, Germany, France, Japan, other countries, to make sure that they actually have environmental criteria in that. So you can, again, think about the offtake of those materials that will come at a premium in the first years, but hopefully not throughout the years to come.
Thank you. We'll take one last question.
Yes, hello. I have a related question. We're in a race to scale, and we've heard that in the first part of the discussion. We're also in a race between big blocks, and we see the massive amount of money being mobilized, especially in the US through IRA program. So it's not only regulation, it's also lots of public money. Do you think there's a risk that once again in Europe, there will be kind of too little, too late, and that most of the technologies will end up being developed over there rather than here? I think we're pretty good. We've been historically pretty good in Europe at initiating technologies, less at scaling them. And what's the big game that we could play here in Europe?
Okay, maybe I can give a quick color on that. I started my career at Airbus, and I can tell you Airbus is today miles ahead from the US. So I would not take it for granted that Europe is at the end of the day always the loser or the losing party in that. I clearly don't buy it. On the IRA, I think in terms of money, in terms of spending, the figures that we have seen at the end of the day are pretty similar, but the big difference we see is in terms of complexity of the schemes. And clearly in battery, I was speaking for battery, if you go to the US today, you're going to have 30 to 45% of cost reductions through different schemes. One is upfront CapEx subsidy, another one is a tax rebate. And somehow it takes just a few months to be granted all that. In Europe, I've been in discussion with the European Commission, the French government, for 18 months to have some significant support that will be clearly not matching that. But it's also our engagement, our will to go, our vision to be reinforcing the European ecosystem and playing a key role into that. But this can have some limits. And the limit we see today is that our own investors are contemplating various options. One is to invest in companies in the US and battery. Another one is to invest in companies in Europe. and they say very clearly, hey, look, we like you a lot, we like your technology, we like your offtake, we like the market outlook. The thing is, if we invest in the US, we're going to have probably, between 5 to 10 or 15% more IRR on our investment. So can you confirm that this will be matched in Europe? And the reality is, this takes simply months. So I'm seconding your question in the sense that it's not going fast enough in Europe. And we are a little bit naive compared to the capacity of execution that the US has. Now, bottom line, my conviction is we're going to match it and we're going to be very competitive in Europe, also for the reason of talent. I mean, the industry talent in the US is a big struggle. So if you look at the battery dynamic in the US, they're going to have an even more difficult challenge to reach than in Europe, simply because a lot of projects will burn all due to lack of talents and people capable of starting those factories. So I'm very confident, but I'm concerned by the fact that Europe takes a long time to decide, validate, and confirm their support to projects such as ours. And I think Northvolt or others, Volkswagen also through PowerCo, had the same concern, or they are even accelerating in the US with probably a little bit of opportunistic approach. We'll see in 10 years what came out of all those projects, but that was my take on that.
I'm going to take one last reflection in 45 seconds.
45 seconds. I think I'll share Benoit's perspective. I think one thing that we would have hoped, of course, it's very positive EU's response, but something in the sort of a complexity reduction act would have been something that is, I think, welcome. Speed, scale, and simplicity is not Europe's forte, but again, we did do some work that's looking at sort of how many projects we have in the industrial sector that are close to FID. The challenge is, will that FID actually happen in Europe? We're hoping to, but that ultimately depends on how fast the permitting, how can we connect to the grid, how do we have the CO2 infrastructure? So I think the devil is in the detail and how fast the member states can actually operationalize, and what remains to be decided in terms of the rule of the game are there in place by the European Commission and other parties.
Well, thank you. I'm sure there are many more questions. We are heading into a coffee break, and I'm sure many of you can also ask the questions directly to the panelists, except Benoît, obviously. Clément, Philippe, Julia, Benoît, thank you. Thank you for being here today, and congratulations for what you are doing.
Thank you. Thank you.